Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Today I'll be continuing on with Burn Your Wings. This will be Part 18, Chapter 18, entitled When Like Meets Like, Part 2. While the first years of UA were taking the provisional license exam, Toshinori was also busy. He went to the prison dubbed Tartarus to meet with All for One. They talked, if disjointed exchanging of words counts as talking. Toshinori hadn't expected the mastermind to be gullible, but so far, he hasn't been able to get any substantial information on where Shigaraki would have gone or what his goals are. "All Might, you have 3 minutes left," rings the voice from the speakers. That finally gets a reaction out of All for One. Wait, that's all? All for One protests, desperate to milk this rare opportunity of human contact as much as he can. Even supervillain overlords aren't immune to boredom after all. "I still have much to say. Then, would this topic interest you? You recall we healed Midoriya's arms when he was in our care. He was too severely injured for the doctor to heal him on his own, so I had to help with some of my quirks." All for One pauses here, as if gauging Toshinori's reaction. Evidently, he seems pleased by the way Toshinori instinctively stilled at the mention of his boy. The villain's scarred face splits into a wide grin. "Did you really think healing him was all I did when he was drugged unconscious and under my mercy?" Bam. "All Might, please calm down and back away." The prison guards fret over the speakers, but calm down. How can he? All for One has the gall to laugh at the way Toshinori has burst from his chair and slammed his hands against the thick glass pane between them. "Ah, yes, that's exactly the expression I wanted to see from you. Rest assured, though, I only truly healed him. He's Tomura's share, after all, not mine." And Toshinori can't. Damn him. Toshinori doesn't even know what to think. On one hand, it would be exactly like All for One to have said this just to rile him up. But on the other hand, All for One is cunning and cruel enough to mention this is a fake possibility, while he actually did do something to Midoriya when the boy was unconscious. Aizawa made sure to take Midoriya to the hospital as soon as he was rescued, of course, but what if All for One did something to the boy that can't be detected by normal means? What if he has a delayed effect? What if he hurt his boy? And what's worse is the fact that All for One undoubtedly knows how panicked Toshinori has become by the few words that he uttered. Knows, and is enjoying it. Bastard. Toshinori grits his teeth and clenches his fists. Midoriya. My boy. Midoriya himself may deny it with adamant fervor, but Aizawa is coming to sympathize more and more with Todoroki's claim. Catnip, magnet, lightning rod, Midoriya is all of that and more. And it's not like Midoriya asked for villains to come stalk him or anything, but damn it, his problem child is going to give Aizawa premature gray hairs. Midoriya is kneeling on the ground with the crying and bleeding HUC child in his arms. Aizawa approaches them cautiously while he unwraps the ends of his capture weapon and readies it in his hands. "Are you hurt?" "I think I sprained my ankle," Midoriya admits. "Could you help me up?" The child is pushed away from Midoriya as he reaches out for Aizawa. Aizawa leans down to grasp Midoriya's arm and helps him up. But the moment he's close enough, Midoriya's eyes glint with a strange light. The hand that had been innocently reaching for Aizawa suddenly has a knife in it, and strikes like a viper for his jugular, too sudden and too fast to reach out of the blue. Except, Aizawa isn't caught off guard. He'd been waiting. As soon as killing intent laces the air, he flings out his strands of his capture weapon that he'd prepared beforehand, forcing his attacker to spring back. They do so, with an extravagant flip, further cementing Aizawa's suspicion. Midoriya is certainly agile, but he doesn't have that kind of fluid flexibility. This Midoriya lands on an outcrop facing Aizawa and cocks their head. They make a strange expression that looks completely foreign on Midoriya's face. "How did you know?" they ask. Aizawa didn't, not for certain anyway. But the thing is, the moment this Midoriya saw him, he called him Aizawa's sensei when usually he slips up and says Eraserhead, in this type of a situation at least. And the way he looked at Aizawa held none of the affection and respect that Aizawa had become used to. That alone isn't enough to instantly be sure that this isn't the real Midoriya, of course. His problem child has been trying to be better about referring to him as his teacher rather than a hero, but with the revelation that there's a shapeshifter around, it is enough to be suspicious, so Aizawa had been on his guard. The HUC's child's tearful eyes are wide. Aizawa puts a hand on his shoulder, guides the kid behind him, putting himself between the child and whoever it is that's still disguised as Midoriya. They themselves gave Aizawa the information, so he can't be sure if it's actually Toga Himiko or if that's too was a trick. He's just about to rush forward and try to capture the villain when a familiar voice calls out to him once more. "Eraserhead!" Aizawa pauses in his assault because there's alarm and horror in that voice. He turns to find yet another Midoriya, who has the HUC child piggybacked on his back. Wait. If that's the real Midoriya and the kid from the HUC, then who's the kid that's at Aizawa's back? He whips his head around and catches the HUC's child, their face split into an eerie grin that's uncannily similar to the one that the fake Midoriya had on their face. There's a knife in his hand. It flashes towards Aizawa's unprotected back. 5 minutes ago. Izuku gulps as he faces Kami. No, Toga Himiko. His flare had forced her to put distance between them, but the HUC child had been protected from the heat and the flames in Izuku's embrace. The girl grins, and then her guise melts away to reveal her true appearance, except she's stark naked. Despite the situation, Izuku instinctively slaps his palm over the kid's eyes. The kid lets out a squawk in surprise, or protest, he's not too sure, and Toga crouches into herself with a giggle. Izuku can't share her mirth, though. His mind is in overdrive, analyzing and speculating. Quirk analysis is his specialty, after all, and what Toga's ability implies is absolutely hair-raising. "You're Toga Himiko, then Uraraka and the girl from Shiketsu. Uraraka mentioned that you sucked out her blood during the summer camp as well. That's your quirk, isn't it? You can transform into someone if you have their blood?" And then the realization hits him. Izuku feels his eyes widen in horror. "When I was kidnapped." He looks at Toga Himiko with creeping dread. "You took my blood." Toga grins. Despite having been found out, Toga doesn't look too upset at all. If anything, she's starry-eyed and flushed. "You figured out all of that just now," she gushes. "I'm so happy that you're thinking of me so much. Say, tell me about yourself too, Tomura and Dabi hog-dude them to themselves the whole time that you were with us and didn't let me play with you." The girl pouts as she wraps one arm around her knees and fingers a knife with the other hand. And just where does she keep pulling these knives out of when she's stark naked? But soon her face breaks into an unhinged grin. "So I'm so happy to meet you again." And in the blink of an eye, Toga is suddenly gone. Izuku starts. He casts his eyes around wildly as he searches for her, tightening his grasp around the HUC kid's shoulders. But despite all of his situational awareness and caution, Izuku is too late to sense before Toga seems to almost materialize behind him and breathes into his ear. "I want to know more about you." Izuku whirls around just in time to glimpse the knife that's stabbing towards him. He pulls the kid out of the way as he pivots away from the blade. "How did you do that?" he asks. He's stalling for time. Hopefully, someone recognized what his signal flare meant and not just brushed it off as part of the exam, while also fishing for information. Toga is the talkative type, plus she has some weird fixation on him, so Izuku hopes that she'll oblige. He's not disappointed. "You want to know more about me, too?" Toga gushes as her cheeks flush and her eyes light up with an unholy glint. "I divert my opponent's sight and hearing away from my presence. Then I stop breathing, stop thinking, and hide. The stop thinking is the hardest part." Some sort of technique, then. It can't be a vanishing quirk, since her quirk is changing her appearance to the person she has the blood of. It would explain how, even though Izuku had felt her watching him through the exam, he was never able to find her. This is another level of stealth. "Why are you here?" Izuku asks, before she can vanish from plain sight again. At the same time, he pulls her towards him, while shooting out a stream of fire around her, trying to capture her. But even as she's being pulled to him, Toga throws something in Izuku's face. Izuku instinctively knocks it away, only to recognize it's too late. It looks just like the marble Mr. Cumpers had used for his quirk, the one that Izuku himself had been trapped in when he'd been kidnapped. Then, does that mean... A second, Toga Himiko bursts out of the marble, and she comes out swinging a knife. Izuku is taken by surprise and reacts just a split second too late. But instead of stabbing him, the blade lashes out and makes a long cut on the cheek of the HUC kid who's still in Izuku's arms. The kid yelps in surprise, pain, and fear. Izuku pulls him back, stepping between him and Toga. But she's already gone. Izuku turns his head around this way and that, thinking that she's going to pounce on them again, but Toga Himiko, either of them, doesn't reappear. What's more, he can't even feel her presence anymore. He doesn't know if she made an escape or if she's just done toying with him and has gone off to find a new victim. With a clone of herself, there's no telling what she could do. One was bad enough, but two Toga Himikos? Izuku suppresses a shudder and tends to the kid in his arms first. "Hey," he calls softly, kneeling down to match his eyes with the child. "It's all right. Are you badly hurt? Izuku doesn't know this kid's name, but he's been keeping admirably still, not screaming or trying to run off in blind panic. But there are tears in his eyes and desperation in the way that his hand fists into Izuku's hero suit and won't let go. "I'm Hayato," he stutters out, fat tears leaking out of his eyes as he bites into his trembling lower lip. Izuku gives him a soft smile. "Hayato, you were very brave," he praises gently, and the kid looks up at him with wide eyes. The fear in them slowly recedes at Izuku's warm tone. "Thank you for keeping so calm. Are you hurt anywhere other than your cheek?" The boy shakes his head. The cut is long but shallow, so Izuku isn't too worried about it. What he is worried about is the fact that Toga now has a bit of Hayato's blood too. Only now does he realize that all this time, Toga hadn't been aiming at him when she swung her knife. She'd been trying to get Hayato in his blood. Why? If Toga isn't here for more of Izuku's blood, then does that mean the amount of blood they took while he was kidnapped is enough for whatever it is they had planned? But then why take Hayato's blood, and just a few drops at that? What is Toga planning? Why is she here? Izuku consciously keeps his mouth from pressing into a grim line. He doesn't want to worry Hayato, after all. He can theorize later. Right now he has to get Hayato to safety. "Do you think you can get on my back? It'll be the fastest to get you to safety," Izuku offers, and Hayato nods again and clambers onto Izuku's back. Izuku doesn't know if it's the way that he is or if it's thanks to the HUC training, but even though he's trembling, Hayato is taking all this remarkably well. It's both admirable and incredibly sad at the same time. "Hold on," is all Izuku says as he lights up with full cowl and runs. But before they can make it to the safe zone, Izuku spots something and stops. It's Eraserhead. Aizawa. A wave of relief and gratitude washes over Izuku as he realizes that the teacher must have recognized Izuku's flare, for the distress call it was, and not brushed it off. The exam grounds are massive after all, and even if Aizawa could go around through the stands and avoid a small city's worth of rubble and obstacles, he still must have come running as soon as he saw the flare, at least for him to have arrived so quickly. But then he notices the people with Aizawa. The hero is facing another Izuku, with another Hayato at his back. So this is where Toga ran off to. Even if Aizawa somehow knows that the Izuku he's facing is fake, he doesn't seem to know that there are two Toga Himikos. The Hayato that's standing behind Aizawa grins. He pulls out a knife. Izuku's breath stutters. "Eraserhead!" Aizawa turns at his voice, and then his eyes widen as he sees Izuku and the real Hayato. He spins around, but it's too late to stop the blade. Izuku pulls the knife, and the weapon is tugged out of his grasp before it hits his target. Aizawa quickly uses his extra time that he's gotten to bind the doppelganger with his capture weapon. His eyes flash red, and the Hayato turns back towards Toga Himiko for a moment before she fades into tatters and dissipates into thin air. "Erase! Aizawa-sensei!" Izuku skids a bit as he lands next to the hero. "It's Toga Himiko," he says in a rush. "She took the appearance of Uraraka and the girl from Shiketsu. Uraraka mentioned that Toga sucked out her blood during the summer camp. Sensei?" Aizawa is giving him a strange look, but he soon shakes it off. "The Midoriya over there already said pretty much the same thing. Guess she repeated what you had said. No wonder she sounded so much like you," he mutters, and Izuku instantly understands. Toga must have parroted back Izuku's speculations to Aizawa. Everyone in Class 1A knows his tendency to ramble, so it would have made it pretty convincing. He swallows. "I don't think that she can use the person's quirk, though," he says as he lights a small flame on his index finger as a demonstration. Aizawa nods, readily accepting his opinion. "I recognize the way the clone disintegrated. All the Dobbies that I fought at the summer training camp disappeared like this, too. They can't take too much force, though. I'm guessing that someone in the League has a cloning quirk." "Twice?" Izuku guesses by process of elimination, and Aizawa gives a non-committal shrug. Izuku carefully lets Hayato down from his back and faces Toga, who still looks like him, again. Faced with both Izuku and Aizawa, Toga puts a hand to her face. Uh-oh, this is looking bad. And then she throws a knife at them. Both Izuku and Aizawa dodge it easily, but Toga/Izuku disappears in that split second. She surges up behind Aizawa, and the hero erases her quirk. Her guise melt away, but she throws dirt in Aizawa's face, making him blink. Toga turns back into Izuku as the real Izuku tackles himself, away from Aizawa. They grapple as they roll over each other, and Izuku uses his superior strength and full cowl to eventually pin himself, down. He's just about to call for Aizawa to bind her with the capture weapon, as soon as he gets the dirt out of his eyes. If they can capture a member of the League of Villains, this will be a golden opportunity. But then a strong gust of wind blows them all over, and a familiar voice is tinged with desperation and calls out, "Midoriya!" Izuku looks up to find Todoroki and Yaorashi jumping down from what looks like a mini tornado. Todoroki is about to run towards him, worry clear on his face, but then he pauses. Oh, Izuku realizes. Toga Himiko is still wearing Izuku's appearance, which means to Todoroki it looks like Izuku is pinning down another Izuku. Without the information, there's a doppelganger running around. It must be confusing as hell. Todoroki looks between the two Izukus with a lost expression. Oh shit. It's a surreal experience seeing two Midoriyas. Shoto looks helplessly between the two Midoriyas for a wild moment, and the two of them stare back looking equally stunned. Todoroki! One Midoriya reaches out to him, but it's soon intercepted as the other Midoriya knocks the reaching hand away from Shoto. Midoriya! Shoto calls again, but he can't dare to do anything. Yaorashi seems to be sharing the same dilemma. Without knowing what kind of situation or quirk this is, they can't charge in recklessly lest they hurt the real Midoriya, whichever one he is. One Midoriya pushes off the other and rushes towards them. Both Todoroki and Yaorashi hesitate. Not sure if he's trying to attack them or regroup with them, but they're saved from having to make the decision by the other Midoriya. The Midoriya that was running towards them is yanked back by an unseen force. Then the other Midoriya is suddenly between them, with his back to Todoroki, shielding him with his body. Flickers of flame run down his arms, ready to burst into a familiar set of wings at the slightest notice. And with that, Shoto knows. Shoto puts a hand on Midoriya's shoulder and draws the other boy closer to him that he stands next to Shoto instead of in front of him. He shoots ice at the imposter, and they backflip away with surprising agility, further proof that they're not the real Midoriya. The Midoriya that's held in a half-embrace looks up at Shoto with a surprised look, as if Shoto could ever not recognize him. Aizawa bursts into the open scene, goggles firmly over his eyes as he activates his quirk. The appearance of the fake Midoriya melts away to reveal Toga Himiko, a very naked Toga Himiko. Yaorashi does a spit take, despite not having been drinking anything, but Shoto is barely even bothered. If anything, the reveal of the imposter's identity only makes him more determined to catch her. Shoto's hand unconsciously tightens where he's holding Midoriya's shoulder. Shoto had seen enough of Toga's character during that video call when Midoriya had been kidnapped. And not that he likes any villains, and especially not anyone in the League, but her fixation on injuring Midoriya makes it just that much more personal. Aizawa has his capture weapon out. Shoto shoots ice to encase her. Midoriya's fire flares out alongside Shoto's ice, and even Yaorashi seems to have clued in and follows their cues by directing gusts of wind to circle around Toga Himiko. But once the dust from their clashing quirks is cleared, Toga Himiko is nowhere in sight. Midoriya looks around swiftly. Watch out. She has the ability to almost disappear from plain sight. Eventually, it turns out they didn't need to look for her. Hello, hello, Tomura. All four of them turn at the sing-song voice to find Toga, perched on an outcrop with a phone in hand. Shoto has no idea where she pulled that out of, seeing as she's still naked. She agilely dodges all their attacks as she speaks into the phone. Sorry. I got attacked and distracted by Izuku-kun and failed the mission. Wait, no, get me out of here, I'm surrounded. Then her glazed eyes hone in on Midoriya. Shoto feels the other boy stiffen in the circle of his arm. Let's meet again, Izuku-kun. Toga blushes as she's sucked into a portal, too fast for any of them to stop. A moment of silence passes before Midoriya slumps. I'd really rather not, he mumbles belatedly in response. Shoto tightens the arm that he has around Midoriya's shoulders. Villain, cat, nip. He hisses out between clenched teeth. You know what? Fine. I'm not even going to argue anymore. Midoriya sighs as he scrubs his hands over his face. Then he lifts his head to give Shoto a brief smile. Thanks for coming so quickly, and for recognizing me. But of course. Are you hurt anywhere? Shoto asks instead of stating the obvious. No, but Toga cut Hayato, so she took a bit of his blood. Midoriya trails off worriedly, and Shoto follows his gaze to find Aizawa crouched in front of a kid. A member of the HUC, presumably. Leave it to Midoriya to find out his name and befriend him in that short span of time. They're not given any more time together, though. Other people, especially their classmates from 1A, also arrive on the scene, and once the police arrive, Midoriya, Shoto, Yaorashi, and the HUC kid are all taken away for debriefing. Shoto and Yaorashi are let out fairly early since their contact with Toga was minimal, but Aizawa and Midoriya are kept back far longer. Even when they're dismissed and Present Mike has come to pick him up, Shoto finds it hard to leave. He keeps turning back to look at the police station where he knows Midoriya is. Todoroki. A voice breaks through his thoughts, and Shoto turns to find Yaorashi and Asa. The taller boy is wearing a conflicted expression on his face, but then he slams his head down into the ground, startling Shoto and Present Mike, though the teacher from Shiketsu just sighs as if they're used to it. I'm sorry. I was too caught up in the past to see who you are now. Please forgive me. The straightforward apology catches Shoto by surprise. Truthfully, he'd almost forgotten about his conflict with Yaorashi in the first place. It's fine, he ends up saying. I sowed the seeds in the first place, and thank you for helping out. We were able to arrive quickly thanks to your wind. Yaorashi raises his head and looks at Todoroki at that. He makes a small huh sound, then grins and gives Shoto a thumbs up with one hand and a thumbs down with the other. As I thought, to be so concerned for a friend, you truly do possess a burning passion, though I still don't really like you. Shoto blinks blankly at the two opposing thumbs that are thrust his way. He wonders if this is what having a combination of Ida and Kirishima with a dash of spite might look like. Present Mike coughs deliberately, drawing their attention to him. This bromance or whatever that's going on is great and all, but I do have your results for the exam, if, you're still interested. He draws while waving a sheet of paper in the air. The teacher from Shiketsu likewise pulls out a piece of paper, and both Todoroki and Yaorashi are handed their grades. A moment of silence passes as they read the results. Huh. Unsurprisingly, the exam is all but forgotten, as Izuku is whisked away to be debriefed by the police as soon as possible. The revelation that a member of the League can transform into other people has shaken their investigation, and even Izuku can tell how worried everyone is. Plus, it's already bad enough that Toga Himiko has Uraraku's blood, but Izuku, as much as he hates it, is more valuable in terms of infiltration. He's already nationally famous, not to mention his connection to All Might. There's no telling what she can do with his face. Toga hadn't been allowed to take too much blood while Izuku had been in custody with the League, since he'd been critically injured throughout most of his captivity, but they don't know the specifics of her quirk, so there's still no telling how long and how many times that Toga can turn into Izuku. It's a disaster just waiting to happen. The police drill Izuku about the 3 days he spent with the League once more, hoping to glean any new revelations they might have missed. Whatever the League wanted must have been big, if not only Toga but Compress, Kurogiri, and presumably Twice were all working together, even if only for support. People speculate that maybe they wanted Aizawa's blood, who's both a teacher of UA and a pro. Maybe they wanted something with Izuku, maybe it was something else entirely. Whatever it was, Toga had mentioned that she failed the mission, but it still leaves everyone worried. By the time he and Aizawa are dismissed, it's late into the night and both are thoroughly exhausted. Once they're inside school grounds, Aizawa pauses and sighs. I would tell you to go get some sleep, but Izuku follows his line of sight to find All Might waiting for them, by the gates. The adults must have already talked about this beforehand, and All Might nods at the other hero. Thanks, Aizawa. I'll take it from here. Don't keep him up too long, is all Aizawa says as he briefly plops a hand on Izuku's head and ruffles it before leaving them, slouching towards the teacher's quarters. Izuku raises a hand to his head where Aizawa had pat him, then turns to All Might. The gaunt man is looking at him like he's just seen something adorable, but then he coughs into his fist when their eyes meet. He waves them over to a bench, then pulls out some files from a briefcase once they're seated. First of all, I believe congratulations are due, he says while handing Izuku the files. Izuku opens it to find a grading sheet for the last part of the provisional license exam. It looks like he hadn't been doing that bad to begin with, and the way that he quickly identified the villain, recovered the hostage and protected and comforted him, had all been seen favorably, with the grading sheet as a small plastic card. It's his provisional hero license. Izuku stares at it for a long moment. Later, Izuku is told that students were graded on how they responded to a real emergency situation. Class 1A actually had an advantage since they all knew it was a real situation from the moment they saw Izuku's flare, and so were able to respond immediately. Their quick response and the way they immediately tried to evade and evacuate the others didn't go unnoticed by the proctors even in the chaos, and they were graded accordingly, most passing with, if not flying colors, respectable grades in general. But right now it all feels rather off. Izuku knows this is a huge step towards becoming the number one hero like he promised. Promised All Might, promised his mother, promised himself, but all he can think of now is, Toga has more ways to exploit my face. And that just... I'm sorry, Izuku blurts out. All Might pauses, and only then does Izuku belatedly realize that the hero had been talking animatedly and congratulating him before Izuku interrupted him. All Might gives him a confused look. What for? What for? What for? Izuku feels the files crumple in his hands. You heard about Toga Himiko, and it's not like I asked her to do what she did or anything, I know that, but still, I should have been more careful. I should have been smarter. I should have been better. Aside from his tendency to mutter about heroes and quirks, and recently his developing tendency to mouth off villains as well, Izuku really isn't on the talkative side. But this time he can't stop himself. The words just flow out of him like a broken dam. Izuku had been biting back words and swallowing his breakdown ever since Kamino, and Toga, coupled with All Might asking what for, had been the last straw. What for? Then Izuku will tell them. I shouldn't have let them take my blood. I shouldn't have been kidnapped in the first place. It's my fault that you were there that night. It's my fault that you lost One for All. It's my fault. I never should have received One for All. And Izuku can't help it. He laughs. Do you know what they call me? I'm the person who ended All Might. And that's the heart of the matter, isn't it? Izuku one-handedly destroyed everything that All Might built. He caused the hero to reveal his true form, caused him to lose the last embers of One for All, had even lied by omission and kept Hizashi a secret. And All Might asks him what for. Izuku drops the crumpled files and buries his face in his hands. I promised, he gasps. That night on Dagoba Beach, when All Might first told him about One for All, Izuku had promised. I promised to break the cycle. I promised to protect you, but instead, I ended up shattering the symbol of peace and breaking the pillar of hope. Monoma's right. In a way, he killed All Might. I'm so sorry. Toshinori is speechless. Originally, he had only planned to congratulate his boy and maybe tentatively bring up All for One. He knew that young Midoriya must have already been thoroughly drilled today because of the Toga incident, but he couldn't help but worry. Only now does he realize that he should have been worrying about his boy's mental state, not just his physical. Reflecting on past events to improve is a good and perhaps even essential trait, but the level of guilt and self-deprecation that Midoriya showed just now goes far beyond that. Toshinori had never imagined that young Midoriya would be carrying such a burden. His boy is so strong that it never occurred to him. But he should have known. This is the same boy that rejected One for All so that Toshinori could stay as All Might longer. This is the same boy that considered leaving UA to protect his mother. But no matter how strong he is, his boy is still just that, a boy. Of course he'd have insecurities, doubts, fears. He'd been keeping remarkably calm and collected for weeks, but of course, that night at Kamino Ward would have been traumatic, and Toga Himiko revealing that she can use him must have been the last straw that broke the camel's back. And even now, as he's finally going through a breakdown that had been a long time coming, young Midoriya is still near silent. His shoulders are shaking and his breath is stuttering, but no sobs or tears make it past the hands that he's buried his face in. It reminds Toshinori of the way that Midoriya Inko cried, and it makes his heart ache. Instead of just flinging his arms around his boy and hugging him tight like he wants to, Toshinori makes himself get up from his seat and crouch in front of young Midoriya. Midoriya needs to hear this from him. I'm sorry I didn't notice, Toshinori whispers in confession, gentle, hoping to coax Midoriya to lift his head and meet his eyes. But my boy, on the contrary, I was grateful to fight All for One. I was grateful it was me, not you. But that doesn't seem to do much to quell the trembling of Midoriya's shoulders, so Toshinori goes on. You must know Sir Night-Eye, he brings up, and the mention of his former sidekick finally urges Midoriya to peek out his fingers. Toshinori smiles despite himself, finding Midoriya's fanboying as adorable as ever. We had a falling out 6 years ago, when I was injured from my fight with All for One. He tried to persuade me to retire, that his quirk foretold that I'd die a gruesome death at the hands of a villain in 6 or 7 years. Young Midoriya's face whips up at that revelation. 6 or 7 years from then, which means this year or the next. Toshinori slowly reaches out for Midoriya's hands, giving him plenty of time to avoid him, and grasps the boy's smaller, shaking hands in his. When I went up against All for One and Kamino, I thought that night would be the moment, Toshinori admits quietly. Not that I'd quite given up, but I'd accepted it. Young Midoriya's eyes are wide and panicked at the easy way his hero speaks of death, but Toshinori squeezes his hands and smiles gently. But then, you were there. I am here, All Might had said to countless villains and civilians, and then his boy had shown Toshinori that he was there. I would have accepted dying, but you were there. You made me want to live with you. You gave me the will to struggle against fate. You showed me a path past the end goal. You saved me. Toshinori brings young Midoriya's hands together in front of his. He looks his boy straight in his wide eyes, and he smiles. So, my boy, thank you. And now Midoriya is crying, tears spilling over his cheeks, but his eyes are no longer as shadowed and pained as they were. You and your waterworks, Toshinori says fondly, and then finally pulls young Midoriya into the hug that he wanted and doesn't bother wiping his own tears. Midoriya melts into him, and they both somehow end up kneeling on the ground crying and smiling, and whispering words of thanks to each other. There will still be people who call Midoriya things like the person who ended All Might. There will still be wounds and bruises, but Toshinori hopes, as he holds his crying heir, to lessen and shield the harm from his boy. And Toga Himiko may still be out there, with a stock of Midoriya's blood, but Toshinori would like to think that no matter what, he'll recognize his boy. It's almost midnight by the time that Shoto hears the sounds of a door opening and closing in the hallway. The sound is so small that even Shoto, who's right next door, wouldn't have heard it if he hadn't been listening for it. Shoto hesitates. Should he just send a message, or should he go over and knock on the door? He wrestles with himself, but in the end he chooses the latter. Sorry, Shoto blurts out as soon as Midoriya cracks the door open. I know you should rest, but I couldn't help. His voice trails off when he notices that Midoriya's eyes are red. Shoto, apologetic tone, rapidly decides to turn alarmed. What happened? Shh. Midoriya puts a finger to his lips and then opens the door further and gestures him inside. Shoto had originally planned to just make sure Midoriya was all right and leave him to rest, but he clearly isn't all right, so he steps inside Midoriya's room. Are you hurt? What's wrong? He frets as soon as Midoriya closes the door. I'm fine. Midoriya assures him as he takes a seat on his bed and pats the space next to him expectantly. He gives Shoto a smile once he obediently sits down, and despite his red-rimmed eyes, that smile doesn't fail to make Shoto relax a bit. It's just, I've been a bit stressed, ever since Kamino, and that thing with Toga was, in many ways, the last straw. I truly feel better now that I've let it out, though. And Midoriya truly does look a bit lighter. Shoto sighs in relief and reaches out with his right hand to cover Midoriya's eyes. Midoriya doesn't even startle or flinch away at the sudden movement. The implicit trust in that simple gesture makes Shoto's heart squeeze in his ribcage. Once Shoto uses his quirk to cool the palm over the reddened eyes, Midoriya moans and slumps forward a bit, pressing his face further into Shoto's hand. Shoto finds his eyes caught on the way that Midoriya's lips part, moist and pink with pearly white teeth peeking out. And to think that I was just bragging about how I was fine without you during the first part of the exam, Midoriya says with a rueful chuckle, breaking Shoto's line of thought. I guess this proves that I really can't do without you, huh? Actually, Shoto begins hesitantly. He'd said he'd tell Midoriya about this later, but this might as well be a good time as ever. It's me that can't do without you." "Hmm?" Midoriya hums languidly, still with his upper face planted in Shoto's hand. It's positively adorable, and Shoto feels a smile creeping up his face despite the words he's about to utter. "I didn't pass the exam." His voice is low and calm, composed. He's already accepted and made peace with the result, but Midoriya gives a full-body jolt at the revelation, and his head snaps up, giving with Shoto's cool hand in alarm. "What? How? Is it because of me? Isn't it?" He whispers in horror. "It's because I sent that signal flare and distracted you. Fuck, I'm so sorry." But Shoto stops Midoriya's rant by gently grasping his forearm. "No, it's not your fault. Rather, it's thanks to you that I even got a chance to retake the exam later," Shoto explains patiently. He's already anticipated that Midoriya might panic like this. He knows only too well about the boy's selfless tendencies, after all. "Inasa had said some things about me and my father, and I lost my cool. We fought each other and lost too many points, but when I saw your beacon, I asked him to help you, and he eventually agreed. Apparently that worked in our favor, and the grading sheet said our willingness to put that behind us to help you was enough to get a second chance." He pauses, then gives Midoriya a look. "Bakugo failed too, but only because he was being himself." That manages to wrangle a small laugh out of Midoriya, and Shoto smiles in success. His hand slips from Midoriya's forearm to lightly hold his fingertips. "Don't worry, I'll catch up to you soon." Midoriya just looks at him for a moment, but then he smiles, with such tenderness that it takes Shoto's breath away. "I'll be waiting." The past day has left Izuku emotionally exhausted, but talking to All Might and Todoroki has, as always, made him feel better. Izuku hadn't noticed how much he'd missed talking to the hero when they'd actually been carefully keeping distance in the wake of Kamino fallout. Now that he's less stressed and he's out of the woods on that part, he's rather embarrassed by the way that he uncharacteristically just lost it in front of All Might. And Todoroki, well, as Izuku has already said, the other boy has this ability to understand and make Izuku feel better with just a few words. He is amazing. Todoroki would probably groan and facepalm again if Izuku said that to his face, though. Anyways, today is the first day of the second semester, and the class is abuzz with the internships the principal mentioned during the opening ceremony. Aizawa goes into more detail during homeroom, and the students talk amongst themselves during the break. "What do you think?" Todoroki asks as he takes the empty seat behind Izuku's, as he has become accustomed to doing. Izuku turns around to straddle his chair and face Todoroki. I'm not sure," he says honestly. "I mean, normally this would be a great opportunity, but what with Toga running around, I'm not sure if it'd be the best thing for me to go outside so much." The class had already been told about Toga Himiko's ability and that she could turn into both Uraraka and Izuku. It had, unsurprisingly, caused some unease, but in true Class 1A fashion, everyone had tried to joke and lighten the air. "Well, at least we know she can't use the quirk of whoever she turns into. Yeah, just ask Uraraka to float something if she seems fishy, and tell Midoriya that he looks like a rabbit." "I do not look like a—" "Yep, this one's ours." "But then, on the other hand, I can't hide forever, and besides, crisis and peril are in the job description of being a hero," Izuku points out. Todoroki puts his chin in his palm, and he himself can't go on an internship this semester because he's yet to get his provisional license, but he seems interested in Izuku's decision. "Do you have somewhere in mind?" Izuku glances at the other boy under his lashes. "I did consider going to Endeavor's this time, but I don't really want to, if it's not with you." Todoroki's chin drops out of his palm, and then he groans and buries his face in his hands. His ears are pink. "How do you keep saying things like that? With that honest, sincere face?" Izuku blinks. "Really?" He pokes Todoroki, but the boy refuses to lift his head for the rest of break time. Izuku mulls over his choices over the next few days. He does want to do an internship, but he's also worried about Toga. Not just about what she can do while he's interning, but in the long run, too. Knowing that she can't use his quirk is a good beginning, but he also has to do better than that. He has to be more prepared. He needs to be able to predict her moves and be 3 steps ahead of her. He needs to learn from someone who excels in that kind of planning. So Izuku goes through the several thousand hero agencies that had offered internships to him back at the sports festival, and tries to pick out the ones that have the heroes or sidekicks who are famed for their foresight, prediction, and planning. Except, there's one name that isn't in the list that Izuku has in mind. Sir Night-Eye. All Might mentioned him when they talked the night of the provisional license exam. The more Izuku thinks about it, the more Sir Night-Eye seems like the best candidate. Not only is his quirk actually foresight, but he was All Might's one and only sidekick, which means he would have plenty of experience and that he probably knows of One for All. But they had a falling out, All Might mentioned. Izuku's pondering whether or not he should go for it and ask All Might for an introduction, or not when his decision is sealed a few days later. The 3 seniors, known as the Big Three, come in to explain about the internships, much to some mixed reactions. One person, Amajiki Tamaki, almost immediately turns his back to the class and tries to find a way to hide his face against a wall, while the girl that introduces herself as Heido Nijiri flits about, asking questions about anything and everything, and moving on before even waiting for an answer. When she gets to Izuku, she claps her hands merrily. "Ah, it's you, the celebrity." Suddenly Izuku feels the urge to join Amajiki in his wall hiding. "That was fun." Nijiri bounces along as Mirio and Tamaki follow. They've just ended their session with Class 1A. They've been getting a lot of attention, what with the villain encounters and their overall high placement in the sports festival, but they still hadn't been a match for Mirio's carefully cultivated tactics or experience. Well, except for one. Midoriya Izuku, the celebrity, as Nijiri called him, though Mirio noted with amusement that the kid looked as shy and unused to attention as Tamaki when she called him that, had accurately predicted some of Mirio's moves, and he'd had some sort of quirk that could pull him. It didn't work while he was completely phasing, but if even the smallest bit of him was corporeal, he'd be snared by Midoriya's quirk. It had almost turned into a stalemate, but Mirio's superior experience had given him the skill and the quick thinking to beat him in the end. Hey, what did you guys think?" Nijiri asks. Tamaki shivers. "One of the 2 guys who had to watch because they don't have their license, Bakugo, he was chomping at the bit. So scary." Nijiri laughs as if Tamaki had just told the best joke, then pokes Mirio's side. "What about you, Mirio? How was Midoriya? He lasted longer than anyone before." Mirio thinks back on Midoriya. He grins. "I have a feeling that Sir would like him." It'd be fun to work with Midoriya at Sir Night-Eye's, Mirio thinks. He didn't actually think it would come true so soon. After Class 1A gets their asses collectively handed to them single-handedly by Togeda Mirio, "I didn't lose to him. Stop grouping me in, you losers." To be fair, your explosions would have done nothing to him either, Kachan. From that, though, Izuku feels the importance of prediction and experience to back it up all the more. So he sucks it up and braves asking All Might, who promptly introduces him to Togeda Mirio again, not Sir Night-Eye. "Togeda is the person Night-Eye recommended to me as my heir," All Might confesses, in a quiet voice as they head to the room that Togeda is waiting for them in. Izuku starts at that, and the hero gives him a smile with mixed emotions. "I had already set my heart on you, though, so when I told him that he was, well, he didn't take it well. We haven't talked to each other since. And that's just sad, isn't it? Especially since All Might still clearly cares about Sir Night-Eye, enough to keep tabs on him and know that Togeda is still interning there." The 2 enter the room before Izuku can say anything, though, and Togeda meets them buoyantly. He doesn't question that All Might would go this far for a mere student, and Izuku wonders if Togeda just assumes that All Might is doing his best as a teacher, or if he too has heard rumors of their relationship. But he does turn to Izuku before agreeing. "Well, first off, what kind of hero do you want to be? Why do you want to be a hero?" Izuku hesitates at that. Uraraka and Ida had asked this too, back when they were preparing for the sports festival. Izuku hadn't been able to answer then, and he'd gladly used All Might calling him as an excuse to run away from the question. But his friends had taught Izuku that it isn't something he has to hide. The friends who know his past still treat him the same way they always did, so Izuku feels okay saying this. He doesn't want to dump his tragic backstory on them like this, of course, but more than that, he doesn't want to lie, even by omission. Not anymore, and especially not on this subject. He owes Togeda, he owes All Might, his honesty. "My father started beating my mother when I was 3, Izuku begins in a quiet voice. Out of the corner of his eye he sees All Might stiffen, and Togeda's smile freeze on his face, but he keeps his gaze down and continues in a low voice. I was too young, too small, too weak to stop him from beating her, so I did the only thing I could. I stepped between them, and I got my father mad enough that he beat me instead of my mother." Togeda has gone deathly still, and a strangled sound that's almost a whimper makes its way out of All Might's throat. But Izuku forces himself to ignore them and continue because he knows that he'll never be able to speak again if he stops now. It happened again, and again, and again. Eventually my father completely left my mother alone and just started coming straight for me. And I was so proud, because even if I couldn't completely save my mother, I could at least protect her from more harm. But my mother... Izuku takes in a deep breath. She cried. She apologized. The memory of broken sobs fills his head. I'm so sorry, Izuku. I couldn't understand for the longest time, but Eraserhead taught me that sacrificing yourself isn't the answer. Not always. All Might showed me that it's not enough to just protect someone from physical harm. A true hero saves what's in here, too. He places a hand on his chest over his beating heart. Izuku lifts his head and his gaze is steady. That's the kind of hero I want to be. That's why I want to be a hero. So that I don't stop at merely protecting people, but so that I can save them. Sir Night-Eye sits at his desk and waits for Mirio to bring Midoriya Izuku in for his interview. He hasn't told anyone, but Night-Eye has already decided that he's going to hire this boy. This is the protege of All Might that he has chosen, and Night-Eye will judge him in his own den. So far, Night-Eye has to grudgingly admit that Midoriya Izuku isn't half as bad as an heir to One for All as he'd thought. He has a strong base quirk, and as demonstrated in the sports festival. He's faced villains and survived time and time again, and there was that incident with Stain. The press may have played it off as Endeavor's arrest, but Night-Eye is too perceptive to be fooled. The man had looked far too disgruntled for having caught the infamous hero killer, but he hadn't denied it either. That probably means that there was some cover-up, and the presence of the 3 students, Midoriya amongst them, suggests that they might have been the ones to actually caught Stain. And seeing as he's requested an internship, Midoriya must have also passed the provisional license exam. So, Midoriya Izuku has potential. He isn't as bad of a candidate as the heir for One for All as he had thought, but being the heir of All Might is an entirely different matter. No matter what kind of personality this Midoriya Izuku may have, Night-Eye firmly believes that Mirio is closer to the ideal #1 hero that All Might envisions. He's positive about that. But All Might himself had been equally, if not more, adamant about his choice. Well then, your heir that I chose and the heir that you chose for yourself, Night-Eye will compare them side by side. That's why he agreed to let Midoriya come, why he's already decided to hire him. Soon enough, though, Mirio cheerfully leads in a familiar face that had been broadcasted on national TV and had been populating the internet. Midoriya Izuku steps inside, takes a deep breath and then freezes. Night-Eye sees the boy go wide-eyed and starry-eyed even at the sight of all the All Might merchandise hanging on proud display. Yes, that is the 10th anniversary not-for-sale tapestry. Midoriya manages to snap himself out of it, though, and sketches a polite bow. Hello, I'm Izuku Midoriya from UA, and I would like to... I already know all that, Night-Eye interrupts, obviously. He adds haughtily as an afterthought. He motions for Mirio and Bubble Girl to leave the office, and once he's alone with Midoriya, Night-Eye brings his hands together and looks over at him over the rim of his glasses. So, you wish to intern under me? Ah, yes, sir. Not only were you All Might's esteemed sidekick, but you excel in analyzation and prediction. I don't know if you've heard, but a villain, Toga Himiko, has been confirmed to be able to take my presence. I need to be able to prepare for her and be 3 steps ahead of her, and Togeda-senpai's prowess has shown that your guidance would be an immense help. None of that interests me, Night-Eye says brusquely. Those are what you would gain from interning here, but I fail to see what merit I would gain by employing you. He may have already decided to hire Midoriya, but that doesn't mean that he has to make it easy for the boy. And if he's being honest, he may be the slightest bit bitter. Night-Eye never claimed to be a good person. But instead of being intimidated, Midoriya just looks genuinely taken aback. Oh, I thought that was obvious. Night-Eye raises an eyebrow. Oh, pray tell. He waits for the boy to boast off his petty victories, to claim that he is worthier than the sidekicks and intern that Night-Eye had handpicked and spent years turning into well-oiled machines. He never expected the words that Midoriya Izuku actually utters. I'm your bridge between you and All Might. If Night-Eye had been standing, he would have lost his footing. What? How? You dare? He can't even... Midoriya has the gall. to keep going while Night-Eye is at a loss for words. "I don't want to presume," he says carefully. "I don't know everything that's happened between you, but All Might mentioned that you two had a falling out, and he also said that butting into other people's business is the true essence of being a hero." He would have. That's exactly the kind of logic the All Might that Night-Eye knows would have said, and hearing that familiar phrase makes something in his chest ache. Midoriya looks down at his right hand. "Recently, a friend told me that just because you love someone doesn't mean that everything you do is right to each other. But it still means that you can try." Night-Eye's breath threatens to stutter at what Midoriya is implying. Try. With All Might. "What makes you think that All Might loves me?" he manages to ask in a strangled voice. He doesn't bother asking what makes him think that Night-Eye loves All Might. His affection and respect for the hero is on proud display, even at this very moment, after all. Midoriya Izuku meets his gaze calmly, and he states with unwavering conviction, "All Might loves you." And at that, Night-Eye can't help it. Even if this is a complete stranger to him, even if Midoriya doesn't know what transpired between them, he's All Might's chosen one, and the fact that he stated it so surely, like it was an absolute fact, it validates something even Night-Eye himself had been unaware of that he needed, reassures his worries, soothes him. Night-Eye recalls the last phone call he'd had with All Might. It had been almost a year ago. All Might had called to tell him that he'd found his successor, and Night-Eye had been livid and hurt that he'd decide something so important without even consulting him. But on the other hand, he'd been over the moon that All Might had called at all. And he'd called because of Midoriya. Midoriya promised that he'd be a bridge between the two of them, but he already has been, even if he doesn't know it. "All Might loves you," Midoriya had said, and Night-Eye can't help it. He smiles. The tilt of his lips might be a little sad, the slant of his brows may be a little relieved, and there may be tears in his eyes, but the smile is no less genuine. Night-Eye clears his throat loudly and stands up before Midoriya can do more than widen his eyes at the sight of the cold hero tearing up. "Contract," he says stiffly while thrusting out his hand. "Huh? Oh!" Midoriya roots around in his bag before pulling out the contract for the internship. Night-Eye takes the sheet, slams the seal down onto it, gives it back to Midoriya, and pushes him out the door in quick succession. He finds Mirio waiting outside with a worried expression on his face. "Mirio. He's hired." And then he slams the door. Midoriya stands there with a confused look on his face, dazedly holding the stamped internship contract. Mirio blinks too, but then he grins and slaps Midoriya on the back. "Well, I'm not quite sure what just happened, but Sir was smiling. Congratulations. I look forward to working with you, Kohai." Midoriya looks up at him with wide eyes for a moment, but then he grins. And oh, yes, Mirio is looking forward to working with this Midoriya Izuku. Later that day, Izuku looks up from his homework when his phone pings. He opens it to find a message from Todoroki. "Do you have any leftover Band-Aids?" Izuku responds immediately. "Where are you and what have you done?" "In my room. Remedial class." Izuku ditches his homework, picks up the fully kitted first aid kit that he'd had since he was little, and goes knocking on Todoroki's door. Todoroki opens it with a sheepish smile, but then winces at the way that it tugs on the scrapes and bruises on his face. Izuku shoos him inside and sits Todoroki on the futon. "I got the original Band-Aids wet when I was washing," Todoroki explains as Izuku gently takes his face in both his hands and examines his injuries. They don't look too deep and the scrapes are scabbing, but the bruises will start to turn into a painful purple soon. Izuku tuts as he opens his first aid kit. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" "A bit here and there, but they're fine, and you don't have to bother, I can do it myself." Izuku silences him with a pointed glare. Todoroki cuts himself off, but instead of being intimidated, he just looks so incredibly fond. "So," Todoroki resumes, talking again, once Izuku is hovering over his face, reapplying salve and bandages. "I spent my weekend getting beat up at remedial class. How was yours?" Izuku gently presses a Band-Aid over the bridge of Todoroki's nose. "I may have impertinently vowed to reconcile two people who've only talked to each other once in the past 6 years, and now have no idea how to actually do it." Todoroki snorts. Izuku is seized with the impulse to poke the bruise on his cheek. "Hey, it's not funny," he grouses, even as he spreads salve over a cut on Todoroki's chin with painstaking care. "You're the one that said if you love each other you can still try, so any ideas?" Todoroki is quiet for a while. He reaches up and takes Izuku's right hand and starts tracing the scars, as he's taken to doing sometimes. Izuku lets him, finishing treating the other boy's one hand. Izuku manages to dress all the wounds on the boy's face by the time that he speaks up again. I heard that my father tried to visit my mother at the hospital. Izuku stills at the quiet words. He puts down the roll of gauze and sits down next to Todoroki, giving him his full attention. He was rejected, of course, but he still sends her flowers, and apparently they're her favorite kind. Even I didn't know she liked them, but he did, and he remembered. Todoroki looks conflicted. It's not that I've forgiven or forgotten what he's done, but it looks like maybe my mother's willing to try. Not now, but someday, maybe. The way he emphasizes the maybe part is adorable. Izuku thinks that he bites his lower lip. Todoroki is clearly skeptical and reluctant, but he isn't completely opposed either, if only for the sake of his mother. And that he's sharing this with Izuku means the world to him. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, maybe start with little things. Even if they don't see or talk to each other directly, things like that might erode some of the everything between them. Izuku gazes at Todoroki for a few more moments before reaching out to gently grasp the tips of his fingers, just like Todoroki had done a few days ago. Thank you, he says, and he doesn't just mean for the advice. He's thanking Todoroki for opening up so much of himself, for sharing something like this. Todoroki smiles, gentle and easy. Anytime. So later that evening, Izuku sends All Might a series of text messages. Does Sir Night-Eye have this office covered with your merchandise when he was working with you too? He even had the 10th anniversary poster. Most of my All Might shrine was printed out on the A4 at the public library. Not that that's bad, but the not-for-sale 10th anniversary poster? I was so jealous. Unknown to Izuku, All Might sputters and almost drops his phone into his bubble bath as he reads the text. He isn't sure what he's supposed to be more surprised about, that apparently Night-Eye has taken up a new hobby while they'd been separated, or the fact that young Midoriya has an actual shrine of him. Well, he supposes he knows what he's getting his boy for his birthday, though it does feel like it'd be really, really weird to buy his own merchandise. Izuku's internship begins right away, and he's called to Sir Night-Eye's office the very next day. Today we're going to be doing patrol and surveillance, one of the sidekicks, Bubble Girl explains. The Night-Eye Agency is currently conducting a serious search investigation on a small designated villain organization. After some debriefing, Izuku is paired off with Togata to go on patrol, but before he goes, he calls out, "Oh, Sir Night-Eye, All Might—" Actually, it's probably not smart to talk about All Might in public, since they're still denying any personal connection with each other. Not that he doesn't trust Togata or Bubble Girl, but the fewer people who know, the better. Izuku racks his mind, then figures that Night-Eye would probably know All Might's real name. Toshinori-san asked me to wish you a good morning. It had been a thrilling moment. All Might had tentatively asked Izuku to pass on the greeting once he mentioned that he'd start his internship today. Izuku recognized it as a hesitant step forward, and he'd been happy to do this for his mentor. Izuku had never been able to leave a person in need of help, after all, and that applies even if, or perhaps all the more, because that person is his hero. All Might is hurt. Sir Night-Eye is hurt, and he genuinely hopes that they can heal and reach out to each other again. But Sir Night-Eye's expression is thunderous. You know that name? Abort. But Night-Eye just turns around with a and then he says quietly as if to himself, He did he? And a faint smile curves his lips before he turns completely away from Izuku. Go on now. Mirio knows the ropes, so watch and learn from him. Izuku lets out a relieved sigh and obediently follows his upperclassmen to the streets. Right, let's go then. But on second thought, I guess you're familiar with patrolling since you went on the first internship after the sports festival, right? Togata asks, as bright and energetic as always. Actually, I didn't get to experience the normal training course, Izuku admits. He'd been too busy getting beat up. Being trained to use full cal by Gran Torino in his previous internship. The one time they did try to go on a patrol and do standard intern things, they ran into Nomu and Stame. And then Izuku spent the rest of his internship in the hospital, or breaking out for ice cream. It's my first time on a patrol, so I'll be in your care. Whoa, seriously? Then leave it to me. Togata leads the way to the more populated areas, buoyantly explaining the little tidbits. People start to take notice of them, partly due to their hero costumes and partly because he's, well, Midoriya Izuku. The Kamino incident hasn't been quite forgotten yet, and Izuku can feel the looks and whispers that he's getting. All might have helped him feel better about the whole thing, but Izuku has never been good with the attention being focused on him, not like this. And come to think of it, this is the first time Izuku's been in full public since that night. Perhaps he senses the way Izuku is tensed up as Togata slaps his back. "Ease up," he says with a grin. "Smile, man. You really are similar to Tamaki, huh? But being known and popular is essential in the present-day hero business, so lift your head and accept it with pride." Togata flashes him a thumbs up. And that, Izuku had been worried that telling Togata about even a portion of his past might change the way the senior looks at him. He didn't want pity, didn't want to be treated like glass, but he didn't even want to be seen as breakable. And thankfully, Togata is as bright and cheerful as ever. What's more, he expects Izuku to keep up and pull his weight. Izuku grins back. "Thank you, senpai." They continue patrolling for a while when a small figure bursts out of an alleyway and bumps into Izuku's leg. "Oh," Izuku says as he crouches down to right the girl. "I'm sorry. Were you hurt?" But the moment their eyes meet, Izuku freezes, because he sees a familiar fear and desperation in the girl's red eyes. "That's no good," a voice calls from behind the girl. "You shouldn't bother the heroes, Eri." And Izuku looks up to see the girl with none other than Chisaki Kai, the leader of the Shi Hasaikai. The man apologizes, smiles under his distinctive plague mask. "Apologies for my daughter. She gets carried away while playing and hurts herself sometimes." And the man keeps smiling that fake smile, as if this girl hadn't been frozen in fear the moment that she heard his voice. As if these wounds can be brushed off as simple scrapes, as if Izuku doesn't know exactly what's going on. So Izuku meets his eyes. He bares his teeth, and he grins right back. "I'm the one who should be apologizing," he says, grinning with a mouthful of bared teeth. But his next words aren't to Chisaki. He carefully circles his arms around the girl that's clinging to him and asks her, his tone softening as his gaze is gentle, "Are you all right?" The girl looks up at him with wide eyes. Chisaki doesn't give her a chance to answer. "She'll be fine. Come along, Eri." But Eri doesn't say a word. She only fists her small hands in Izuku's hero suit with a sort of desperation. And Izuku knows. "Excuse me, but your daughter seems to be frightened by something," Izuku says, looking up at Chisaki again, though his grin has turned into something sharper. He lets Eri cling to him and supports her weight in a hug that he hopes she finds reassuring. And these wounds are too severe to have come from just playing around. Izuku can feel Togata trying to subtly stop him, and he understands. This is the organization that Sir Nidai had been hounding, so it might hinder their investigation if Chisaki gets suspicious. But Izuku knows. He knows. "Trembling in fear without being able to make a sound isn't normal for a young child," he challenges. "Don't impose your idea of normal on other families," Chisaki responds. "People have different characters, after all," Togata says in an attempt to smooth things over. But Izuku knows, better than anyone, that just because someone is your father doesn't mean that he won't hurt you. Izuku's mind is in overdrive. If this man really is her father, then it will be hard to do something. They're heroes, not the police, and only student interns at that. They'll need concrete evidence to actually do something. "Can we at least get her to get checked up at a hospital if you won't tell us what's wrong?" Izuku tries. If they can get Eri to a hospital, the doctors might be able to give proof of severe injuries, of abuse, and enable them to act. Togata is quiet now, seemingly having caught on or resigned to Izuku's relentless insistence. Chisaki looks at him for a long moment, and then he spreads his arms with a sigh. "Fine. Heroes are really sensitive about their jobs, I see. If you're going to hold her, I'll lead the way. There's a shortcut through this alley." And as the man turns to lead them into the dark alley, he reaches down and begins to peel one of the gloves from his hand. Killing intent laces the air. Izuku grits his teeth. He knew it. Chisaki is doing something to Eri, hurting her, and he's going to do so again. Chisaki may be the young boss of the Shi Hasaikai, but he may be a villain, may be a bad person. That doesn't mean that Izuku won't fight him to protect this child. So Izuku prepares to do what he's always done when he's found a tormentor in their victim. He's about to step between them. But before he can, Eri beats him to it. As soon as Chisaki's killing intent prickles at her skin, Eri gasps. Then she unclenches the hands that she had fisted in Izuku's suit and pushes off of him, slips under his arms and turns to face Chisaki with her trembling back to Izuku. And then She steps between them. She steps between them. This concludes Chapter 18 of Burn Your Wings. Chapter 19 will be up here shortly for you guys, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.